I sat alone in the dimly lit room with a single suitcase by the door. The air was thick with the weight of my emotions, but my will remained strong. I could feel the coolness of the wooden floor beneath my feet, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the corner, and the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall, each second an eternity. My heart was pounding, yet I was calm. It was a surreal moment, the kind of stillness that often precedes a storm. My mind raced back and forth between memories, decisions, and everything that led me to this point. In that quiet room, I began to relive the days that had brought me here, the days of sacrifice, love, hope, and disappointment. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter and conversation that once filled this house, now a hollow shell of its former self. This house that I once thought was a home, where the warmth of love would always shield us from the harsh winds of the world, now felt like a prison. Here's a story of how my husband kicked me out of the house when he came to know that I was fired. But something unreal happened later on. I'm in my mid-50s, working in a small-scale company. One day, I arrived home from work and put my bag on the table, my heart heavy with the terrible news that I had to share. I had so many thoughts running in my mind at that time. What will be Greg's reaction? What am I going to do after that? I was nervous, confused, and hell afraid. I have been practicing how I will break this news to him. Maybe I will just simply tell him that I was fired, or I will twist the truth and tell him that I resigned, because I thought I could give more time to the house and my hobbies. But deep down, I knew the latter was not an option for me, as we were solely relying on my job. Greg lost his job last year, and I was the only breadwinner in this house. Greg sat on the couch, eyes glued to the television, unaware of the shift about to take place. "Greg, I got fired today," I said hesitantly. Greg barely looked up and shouted, "Fired? What do you mean, fired?" I tried explaining, but my voice was shaking, and I knew that every word I would say would be useless. "They had to downsize. I'm just a victim of layoffs. But you don't have to worry, I have savings," I added, seeking to relieve his concerns. I didn't want him to notice the element of doubt in my voice, but I knew I was lying. I made this up just to comfort him. There was no way to relieve the financial strain that hung over us. His head snapped toward me, his face darkening. "Savings? Do you think that's all we need to pay our bills, rent, and car payments? How could you let this happen?" That night, the dinner was tense. Greg's rage bubbled under the surface until he banged his fist against the table and said, "Do you know what? Perhaps it's best that you go. I cannot afford to care for a deadweight." A deadweight? That's what I was for him. But there's something you should know about Greg. This wasn't the first time he made me feel like a burden. It started with small jabs. Criticism over how I cooked, how I dressed, how I laughed too loudly or not enough. Over time, those jabs turned into silences, into distance. I once adored the way he smiled when we first met. But now, all I saw was disdain. It's strange how someone you love can become a stranger in your own home. He used to say, "We're a team," but when the game got tough, he was the first to walk away from the field. I spent sleepless nights trying to understand what I'd done wrong. Was I not enough? Was my loyalty misplaced? I kept feeding a relationship that was starving me. Now that I needed him the most, he stepped back. These words felt like a paper cut throughout my body. A lump formed in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I was determined that I wouldn't let Greg see me break or be vulnerable, so I decided to face the music and met his gaze with a stern look. "You want me to leave? Fine. I'll go." My eyes welled up, but I held my tears back, crying over a man who had never truly seen my worth. At this point, I quickly packed all my belongings in a suitcase. As I reached inside the drawer, my fingertips brushed upon a sealed document, a trust fund statement with a balance of $10 million. $10 million. My hands started to shiver, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I immediately recalled what this document was and was super relieved. Tears of happiness were rolling down my cheeks. I hugged that piece of paper and thanked God, as it was truly unexpected. I opened up that trust fund document and chuckled, If only he knew. Initially, I couldn't believe it. The money had always been there in the drawer, tucked away in an account that my grandmother had set up for me before her death. It was never really in my mind. I was so caught up in the frenzy of marriage and duties that I assumed that I needed to struggle with Greg, because that is what a loyal wife did. But as I read the paperwork, everything flashed back in my mind. How Mom had always warned me to be prepared and never allow love to blind me against my own values. Her words echoed in my thoughts, like a hymn of knowledge that I had long neglected. I felt relieved and thought how luck had decided to be in my favor. I recalled all the times I had agonized about money, cut corners, and gone without, so Greg didn't really have to worry about a thing. All the while, I was unintentionally sitting on a fortune. The realization struck me hard, not about the money, but about myself. I'd been taught that my worth was determined by my sacrifices, and that love included suffering pain. But, with my newfound clarity and independence, I envisioned a completely different future for myself, one in which I would never have to beg for love or security again. As I stared at that piece of paper, I thought of Grandma. She had been a fierce woman, someone who believed in preparing for every possibility. When she left me that money, she did so not because she thought I'd fail, but because she knew life had its storms. "Always have your umbrella ready, darling," she used to say. Now, standing at the edge of a broken marriage, I finally understood what she meant. That night, I didn't just feel rich, I felt awakened. The walls that had once echoed my anxiety were now filled with quiet power. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that house hours ago. I had been tested, and I had found strength I never thought I had. I looked around at the furniture Greg and I picked out together. Each item told a story, some beautiful, some painful. But it was time to write a new one that didn't revolve around appeasing someone else's ego. Walking away was not as easy as it seems. Even with the money, I had questions and anxieties that lingered late at night. Where may I go? How could I start over? How am I going to face society? Friends who had previously celebrated my marriage now doubt my decision. "Are you certain you want to do this?" "Marriage isn't easy," they continued, as if I hadn't spent the previous 20 years discovering this personally. Then there was Greg himself. He has always wanted to be dominating and used me for his personal benefit. I was just too naive at that time and thought maybe my constant effort and love would actually make things work. And many times, he promised me that he would change and make things all right. But I know better now. This was not love. It was desperation. He'd left his comfort zone, and I was no longer his safety net. My dearest friend, Rachel, was one of the people whose support remained constant. She'd always felt my dissatisfaction, but never pressed. She knew something was wrong in my life and told me many times that I should leave Greg and turn a new leaf over. Sometimes I wonder if Rachel's moral and emotional support was not there for me. Maybe I would have given up a long time ago. Rachel and I met in college, and even back then, she was the one person who saw through my brave face. She had been there when I first met Greg. I remember her warning me gently, "He's charming, but be sure he sees you." I had laughed at the time, brushing it off as protective best friend energy. Now, her words echoed with eerie accuracy. There's a strange loneliness that follows when your world shifts and the people around you don't understand. Some of our friends had built their lives on the same shaky foundations I did. Marriages held together by routine, not love. So, when I broke the pattern, it threatened their illusion too. "She must be going through a phase," they'd whisper. But this was not a phase. This was me waking up. I stepped outside with a suitcase in one hand and a leap of faith in my heart. With each step forward, I felt lighter. I was walking away from the past and towards something better. Later that night, I checked into a luxury hotel. It wasn't just the silk sheets or the city lights from the window. It was the silence, finally free of tension. I drew a long bath, let myself sink into the warmth, and watched the steam rise around me like a spirit being released. I had been drowning for years without realizing it. Now I could breathe. I remember holding the glass of wine from the minibar and toasting to myself. To freedom, I whispered. It felt ridiculous and empowering all at once. No one had ever celebrated me like this before, not even Greg. I decided I would start. From now on, I'd be my own biggest cheerleader. The hotel lobby was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold I had left behind. I checked in with ease, ordering a lavish dinner in my suite. For the first time in years, I was savoring the moment. Then something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed. "Margaret, I made a mistake. Please, come back." I stared at the message, the weight of the past pressing against my mind. It wasn't just about Greg's words. It was about everything that led to this moment. I always prioritized his happiness over mine, which I feel I shouldn't have. I kept pouring in until there was nothing left of me. But there was a moment of temptation. There always is. I thought about the old days, the laughter, the trips we took. But then I remembered the silence, the slamming doors, the feeling of being small. That wasn't love. That was survival. I wrote a letter that night, not to Greg, but to myself, a promise that I would never again shrink to fit someone else's comfort. I folded it neatly and placed it in my wallet beside the trust document, a reminder of where I'd been and where I was going. The trust fund statement helped me destroy the delusion I had been living under for so long. In all honesty, it wasn't the money that gave me confidence. It was the fact that I had never been ready to give up while I was the one actually putting in the effort. I was the one supporting my family. I was the one who gave up everything for this marriage. It was a reminder of the freedom I had long forgotten, buried behind the weight of years spent in a partnership that never fully recognized me for who I was. This money was the key to my independence, a safety net I had never considered, but now recognized was necessary. For years, I disregarded the little, quiet voice in the back of my mind, the intuition that said, "What if you need a way out?" I'd put it away, telling myself that genuine love demanded patience, sacrifice, and perseverance. I had convinced myself that if I just stayed a little longer, worked a little harder, and loved a little more, Greg would see me for who I actually was, and everything would be okay. I had bought into the idea of progress, thinking that the difficulties were only momentary setbacks. But now, with that trust fund statement in my hands, everything became plain. The weight of the years, the sacrifices, the disappointments, all of it washed over me in a wave. I realized that I had been so obsessed with the need to make things work, to be the supporting wife, that I had forgotten about myself, my own needs, and my own worth. The money I had concealed, the security that had always been mine, but that I had neglected, was a source of optimism. It was my escape, my passport to a life of freedom. I no longer had to rely on Greg, his unfulfilled promises, or his hollow words. Now, with a single glance at my phone, I saw everything clearly. This apology coming from his side was not love or regret. It was all about losing control. I decided not to let my emotions win and took a deep breath, removing any elements of doubt. Then, with a steady hand, I calmly pressed delete. I knew there was nothing left in my past. I had to build something new for myself. For far too long, I felt that love demanded sacrifice and devotion required endurance. But one thing I have learned is that love must never be conditional. It should never be evaluated in terms of financial stability or convenience. Greg always felt that I needed him. But here's the truth. I had always been the foundation that supported both of us. I was the only one putting in the effort so that we could stay together. My love was misunderstood as a weakness. With the $10 million I have, I decided to make prudent investments with the trust fund, not just in myself, but also in my aspirations. I plan to launch a firm that aims to assist women, especially those who don't have a strong support system, who are widows or are divorced, to find their freedom, voice, and strength. With newfound confidence, I started preparing for my new business. I wasn't simply surviving, I was prospering, And this time, the business wouldn't just be about profit, it would be about purpose. I met with advisors, lawyers, and women with similar stories. Each conversation became a building block. I named my organization New Roots because that's what we all deserve. A fresh start, a foundation that's truly ours. The first woman I helped was named Lila, a single mom escaping an abusive relationship. When she hugged me after getting her first job, I cried harder than I had in years. Not from sadness, but from fulfillment. This was the life I was meant to live. In retrospect, what seemed like the worst period of my life turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Until that time, I had been living in the shadows of other people's expectations and my own anxieties. Being forced to start anew was ultimately the finest thing that could have happened to me. It opened my eyes to a universe of possibilities I had never considered before, and I will be eternally thankful. It was at that moment I realized how something can actually be a turning point in your life. And I also felt that sometimes losing everything does not mean failure. Sometimes it creates opportunities. Sometimes it opens doors that we don't know exist. And in that insight, I learned the most profound truth of all. Never allow someone to make you feel trivial. Your worth has to be defined by you. But also, something else changed in me. I started painting again. I joined a hiking group. I traveled solo to Italy, a dream I had shelved for decades. Each day was an act of reclamation. I wasn't just building a life, I was healing one. And then, one day, I stood in front of the mirror and didn't see the woman who had been left behind. I saw the woman who rose, strong, capable, radiant. And I smiled,